On a clear night in the sandy dunes of Saudi Arabia in 1983, the Egyptian author Robert Bauval was taking some time off his research by spending the weekend camping out in the desert with his family and friends. He had spent the last several years trying to understand why the ancient Egyptians were so utterly obsessed with the stars, an area of study known as archaeoastronomy. Perhaps by some subconscious motivation, he was woken up in the middle of the night after falling asleep counting the stars in the night sky. Upon waking, he was greeted by the luminous band of light appearing as a celestial river against the vast expanse of the cosmos. It was the Milky Way, of course, and it was known by the ancients to be the cosmic extension of the Nile River. Immediately, he recognized the constellation of Orion, a collection of much brighter stars on the western side of the Milky Way, most easily located by the 3 stars of Orion's belt. Shortly after this, Bauval had an epiphany, and quoted the words from the pyramid texts he remembered all too well from his research. Found in Pyramid Text 1717, quote, "The duat has grasped the king's hand at the place where Orion is, and, O Osiris King, betake yourself to the waterway. May a stairway to the duat be set for you at the place where Orion is." Calmly he uttered, "The 3 pyramids of Giza," and so began an investigation that would enthrall him for decades to come. To strengthen the argument that the pyramids were meant to represent the constellation of Orion, we're going to explore what the ancient Egyptians themselves thought of Orion, Sirius, and other stars. When viewed with astronomy in mind, the pyramid texts contain astronomical data on these celestial bodies, and are connected to the duat, which was the underworld in Egyptian mythology where the gods would travel to after death. We'll also explore more evidence that the Giza complex is mirrored in the sky, and the very controversial idea that the pyramids and the Sphinx are a snapshot of the cosmos, frozen on the ground representing the year 10,500 BC, or possibly even 36,000 BC. The origin of Bauval's discoveries date back to the 1960s when the Egyptologist and architect Alexander Badawi and astronomer Virginia Trimble discovered that the southern shaft of the king's chamber was pointed like a gun barrel on the belt of Orion during the Pyramid Age, roughly 2500 BC. What they didn't investigate was the southern shaft of the queen's chamber, and Robert Bauval was the one to demonstrate that during the Pyramid Age, this shaft was directly sighted on the star Sirius. Up to this point, the Orion correlation theory was well in accordance with the standard model of history as far as Orthodox Egyptologists were concerned, as circa 2500 BC is the date given to the original construction of the pyramids at Giza. Indeed, Bauval presented his theory and published papers on his findings, and many were in agreement with him that the master plan of the pyramid architects could have been to create an eternal image of the stars on the ground. It wouldn't be long until further inquiry led to some shocking implications that would necessitate a rewriting of history, challenging the conventional view of our distant ancient past. In ancient Egyptian cosmology, Osiris was the god of the underworld and the first pharaoh of Egypt. He was also the god of agriculture, the afterlife, and resurrection, and the Egyptians believed that he was responsible for the annual flooding of the Nile. When Osiris and the gods that succeeded him died, it was believed they ascended to the constellation of Orion. The mythological earthly counterparts for Orion is Osiris, and for Sirius it is Isis. The period of the year that dominated the minds of the Nile dwellers was the summer solstice. In the time immediately preceding the Pyramid Age, the summer solstice coincided with the heliacal rising of Sirius and the start of the Nile flood. The rising of Sirius also denoted the new year in ancient Egypt and served as the basis for calendrical computations. This annual flooding of the Nile was crucial to the inhabitants of the region, as it ensured the abundance and fertility of the crops for the following year and made life possible in Egypt. This event was deeply embedded in the psyche of the ancient Egyptians, and it is not surprising that it has symbolic and religious significance behind it. A few weeks before the Sirius-Summer solstice-flood conjunction, there came a sort of astronomical omen in the sky, which was the appearance at dawn of the fully risen Orion. Interestingly, the pyramids are slanted along a diagonal in a southwesterly direction relative to the Nile. Likewise, the three stars of Orion's belt are slanted along a diagonal in a southwesterly direction relative to the Milky Way. Just like how the smallest star in Orion's belt is offset slightly to the east, so is the smallest of the three pyramids, the Pyramid of Menkaure, is also offset to exactly the right amount relative to the diagonal formed by the pyramids of Khafre and Khufu. These facts, coupled with the alignments of the shafts within the Great Pyramid pointing at Orion and Sirius during the Pyramid Age, make for a compelling argument that the master plan for the layout of these monuments was to mimic the layout of the Duat, the area of the sky where the gods would be united in the afterlife. This is confirmed in Pyramid Texts 819 to 821, describing how the dead king joins Osiris and becomes a star in Orion in the eastern horizon at dawn. Quote, "Behold, he has come as Orion. Behold, Osiris has come as Orion. O king, the sky conceives you with Orion. The dawn light bears you with Orion. You will regularly ascend with Orion from the eastern sky of the sky." There's plenty more I could quote, but if you need more evidence that the Orion constellation is deeply embedded in Egyptian mythology, then I'd recommend checking out Robert Bauval's books. Moving on, this is the part where the pseudo-archaeology comes in, as the following discovery Bauval made was essentially heresy to the standard model of history and was vehemently criticized by mainstream Egyptologists. Bauval used a sophisticated computer program designed to map the precessionally induced changes of all the stars in the sky over any part of the world in any epoch, which basically enables one to rewind the sky as it would have appeared to our ancestors. He found that the Orion correlation was present and obvious through all the ages, but in 10,500 BC it bears the most perfect match. In 10,500 BC, Orion was positioned at its lowest point on the meridian in its 25,920-year precessional cycle. I'm sure many are familiar with the precessional wobble of the Earth, which causes the sunrise on the vernal equinox to slowly migrate through the constellations of the zodiac over a cycle of nearly 26,000 years. Well, this same phenomenon affects the declination of visible stars in the sky, which causes Orion to exhibit very gradual but drastic changes in altitude. It takes roughly 13,000 years for Orion to go from its lowest point to the highest point on the meridian, 13,000 years up, 13,000 years down. To the Egyptians, marking the lowest point in Orion, or Osiris's cycle, would have been a significant event, possibly symbolizing the first time or Zep-Tepi in Egyptian mythology. This was the Golden Age when the gods walked the earth and created the grids of reality. Also at the time around 10,500 BC, the Milky Way was seen roughly vertical and was positioned in a way that it appeared to be an extension of the Nile. It seems then that the pyramids might have been built to freeze in time an image of the sky, as above, so below. What gives further weight to this is the fact that the Sphinx has significant astronomical alignments during this time as well. The Sphinx was an equinoctial marker, with its gaze directed precisely due east towards the sunrise on the vernal equinox. Around 10,500 BC, the vernal equinox rose in the constellation of Leo. This would make perfect sense, as many believe that the original head of the Sphinx was the head of a lion, but was later recarved by Khafre, who was the proposed builder of the Sphinx in the 4th dynasty. But if the Sphinx was carved around 2500 BC, wouldn't it have made more sense to make a monument that is astronomically aligned towards the vernal equinox into a bull, as at this time it would have been the age of Taurus? It seems much more likely that it was originally carved as a lion, representing the constellation of Leo as we transited through that age. Again, this would also coincide with the mythical notion of as above, so below, a phrase found in the Emerald Tablet of Thoth, the Egyptian god of writing. But how do we know that these monuments are signaling the most recent age of Leo, and not the previous one in 36,000 BC? It may sound crazy to some the idea that the pyramids could be 38,000 years old, but it isn't out of the realm of possibility. The Turin King List is a 3,000-year-old document written on a papyrus stem that lists every Egyptian god and king that ruled, dating back to 36,620 years ago. Only fragments have been discovered and pieced together, and we are still missing the introduction to the scriptural canon. According to the list, the first human king was Menes in 4400 BC, and prior to that, it was the gods and demigods that ruled. While I think 10,500 BC is a more likely date for the beginning of the construction of the pyramids and Sphinx, as it coincides with the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the ending of the Ice Age, it is very interesting nonetheless. So let's reiterate the key points of the Orion correlation theory. First, Orion was identified with Osiris. Dead kings were believed to join Osiris in the celestial duat or even to become an Osiris. The pyramid texts clearly indicate that Orion was the principal afterlife destiny for the departed kings. Next, the three pyramids of Giza lie on the west bank of the Nile, set diagonally relative to the river, and the three stars of Orion's belt are on the west bank of the Milky Way, also set diagonally relative to the Milky Way, the celestial river. The line passing through the two larger pyramids at Giza do not pass through the third, smaller pyramid, just as the line passing through the two brighter stars of Orion's belt do not pass through the dimmest of the three stars. In 2500 BC, the southern shaft of the king's chamber was pointed directly at Orion when it would reach its culmination of 45 degrees in the southeast. In 10,500 BC, Orion would only rise to about 10 degrees at culmination, this being the lowest or beginning point in its precessional cycle. Since Orion was identified with Osiris, then it bears the question, could 10,500 BC have been the fabled Zep Tepi, the first time of Osiris? Lastly, the Sphinx faces due east. In the age of Leo, circa 10,500 BC, this leonine monument would have fixed its gaze on its astronomical counterpart in the sky, the constellation of Leo, as it rose over the horizon on the spring and vernal equinoxes. I honestly think it's silly to label all of these alignments as some grand coincidence or pseudoscience. In fact, Bauval's theory has been put through rigorous tests by the Department of Mathematics and Physics at the University of Salento in Italy, and the results showed that it couldn't be falsified. In my opinion, this all just shows how much more intelligent and advanced the ancient Egyptians were. The fact that it required us to invent sophisticated technology and software to fully understand the sheer complexity behind these vastly ancient monuments is pretty funny. So that's the Orion correlation theory. Let me know what you think in the comments, and until next time, stay curious. Peace.